Chipo's heart raced as she watched the sun dip behind the hills, casting a golden glow over the village. She had always loved this time of day, when the world seemed to pause and breathe. But tonight, it felt different. Tonight, she was meeting Tawanda, the boy who had stolen her heart. Tawanda was the son of a prominent family in Zambia, known for their wealth and influence. Every time they spoke, Chipo couldn't help but feel the distance between their worlds. She lived in a modest mud house with her mother, tending to the farm, while Tawanda's family resided in a mansion with servants and endless opportunities. Their love, though deep, was born of contrasts. Chipo was well aware of the expectations placed on Tawanda. His family had plans for him to inherit their fortune, manage their vast lands, and continue their legacy. Chipo often found herself lost in thoughts of what the future might hold. Could she fit into that life? Was she willing to leave behind her humble world and become part of something so different, so grand? Yet Tawanda was kind and loved her for who she was, not for her family status. He spoke of dreams of building a life together, one that merged both their worlds. But for Chipo, the question lingered in her mind. Could she truly leave her roots behind for a future so unfamiliar, and was the price of that future worth it? Days passed, and Chipo found herself torn between the love she felt for Tawanda and the life she had always known. Her heart ached at the thought of leaving her village and her mother behind. The simplicity of her life, working the fields, sharing meals with her family, was a comfort she had always known. But Tawanda's world was full of promise and possibility. His family offered her a future that many girls in her village could only dream of. Yet, every time she thought of it, she felt a pang of unease. Could she really change so much to fit into his world? One evening, as they sat together under the old tree by the riverbank, Tawanda spoke of his own struggles. He confessed that his family's expectations weighed heavily on him. He longed for freedom, to follow his own passions and dreams. Chipo listened, her heart aching for him. She realized that Tawanda, too, was trapped in a world where his every move was dictated by duty and legacy. They both longed for the same thing, freedom to be themselves. "I want us to be happy, Chipo," Tawanda said softly, "but I don't want you to feel like you have to change for me. I love you for who you are, not for where you come from." Those words settled deep in Chipo's heart. Maybe she didn't have to leave her world behind. Maybe happiness wasn't found in grand fortunes, but in accepting who you were and finding peace within it. For the first time, Chipo felt a glimmer of hope. True fulfillment, she realized, wasn't about wealth or status. It was about love, choice, and finding joy in the present. The sun rose over the village, and Chipo woke to the familiar sounds of roosters crowing and children playing in the distance. But today was different. The feeling of unease that had gripped her the past few days weighed heavily on her chest. As she sat down at the breakfast table, her mother, noticing her troubled expression, asked, "What's on your mind, my daughter?" Chipo hesitated, unsure of how to share the conflict raging inside her. She loved Tawanda, but she was unsure if she could leave everything she had ever known. Her mother, wise and understanding, reached out and placed a hand on her shoulder. Sometimes, true love requires sacrifice, but it's important to ask yourself, is the sacrifice worth the life you want to live? Chipo nodded, but deep down, the questions remained. She spent the rest of the day walking the fields, considering her options. The weight of the decision pressed down on her. Could she ever fit into Tawanda's world, or would she lose herself in the process? Tawanda arrived at the village as the sun began to set. Chipo met him by the riverbank, where they had shared countless moments of laughter and dreams. His smile, as always, made her heart flutter. But today, something was different in his eyes. A sense of urgency, of something unspoken. "I've made my decision," Tawanda said, taking her hands in his. "I want you to be with me. You don't have to change, Chipo. Together, we can create a life that's uniquely ours." Chipo's heart raced. She longed to believe in his words, but fear held her back. Could they truly create a life together when the world around them seemed so determined to keep them apart? Tawanda seemed to sense her hesitation and stepped closer. "You don't have to leave everything behind, Chipo. We can find a way to blend our worlds." Chipo was torn. Her love for Tawanda was undeniable, but her loyalty to her roots was equally strong. Could she find a balance between these two worlds, or would love alone be enough to carry them through? The next day, an unexpected letter arrived at Chipo's house. It was from Tawanda's family, inviting her to a grand celebration at their mansion. The event was to mark the beginning of Tawanda's official training to inherit the family's fortune. Chipo's heart skipped a beat. This was it, the moment that would define everything. If she accepted the invitation, she would be stepping into a world she had only ever dreamed of, a world far removed from her humble life. Her mother, reading the letter, simply said, "This is your chance, my child. But remember, true happiness when you are at peace with who you are." Chipo stood by the window, gazing at the horizon. She had never been to the mansion, never seen the grandeur Tawanda's family was known for. Would this be the moment that changed her life forever? Or would it confirm that her place was in the village, among the people she loved? The day of the celebration arrived, and Chipo found herself standing before the towering gates of Tawanda's family mansion. The ornate gates, the manicured gardens, the grand facade, everything about the mansion screamed wealth and power. Chipo felt a wave of insecurity wash over her. What did she, a simple village girl, have to offer in a world like this? As she walked into the mansion, she was greeted by Tawanda's family, who welcomed her with open arms. His mother, a regal woman with eyes that scrutinized every detail, looked at Chipo with a mix of curiosity and expectation. "Tawanda speaks highly of you," she said with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Chipo's heart raced. She could feel the weight of the expectations hanging in the air. Was she really ready to enter this world? Tawanda, sensing her discomfort, took her hand and led her into the gathering. But despite his warmth, Chipo couldn't shake the feeling that she was an outsider in a world that was both mesmerizing and cold. As the evening progressed, Chipo found herself surrounded by influential figures from all walks of life. Politicians, businessmen, and wealthy landowners mingled, exchanging stories of their success. Chipo, feeling small in comparison, struggled to keep up with the conversations. She was used to the simplicity of her village, where life was slower and conversations were deeper, not defined by status or wealth. Tawanda's father, a towering man with a commanding presence, approached her. "You must be Chipo," he said, his voice firm but not unkind. "Tawanda tells me you're from a fine family. I'm sure you'll adjust well to this life." Chipo nodded, though her heart thudded in her chest. She had no idea what to say. How could she possibly adjust to this life when it was so different from everything she had known? Tawanda, noticing her discomfort, pulled her aside. "Don't worry," he whispered. "They'll come around. You're part of this family now." Chipo smiled weakly, but the doubts gnawed at her. Was she truly ready for this? Or was she losing herself in the process? As the night wore on, Chipo felt increasingly isolated. Tawanda's family was kind, but it was clear they had their own expectations for her, expectations she wasn't sure she could meet. She found herself retreating to the garden, seeking solace under the stars. Tawanda followed her, concern etched on his face. "You're quiet tonight. Is everything okay?" Chipo looked up at the sky, the cool night air calming her nerves. "I don't know if I can do this, Tawanda. This world, it's not mine. I don't belong here." Tawanda sighed and sat beside her. "I never wanted you to feel this way, but I want you to know that no matter where you come from or what you do, you'll always have a place by my side." For a moment, Chipo felt comforted by his words, but deep down, she knew the truth. The world they lived in was too different from her own, and no matter how much she loved Tawanda, it seemed that their worlds were destined to remain apart. The next day, Chipo's fears became a reality when she learned that Tawanda's family was facing a financial crisis. The fortune they had built over generations was at risk. Tawanda's father had made a risky investment that had backfired, and the family's holdings were in jeopardy. Tawanda, normally calm and composed, was visibly shaken. "This isn't how I wanted things to go," he confessed to Chipo. "I thought we had everything under control, but now..." Chipo looked at him, her heart breaking. This was the reality of the world Tawanda had inherited, a world where wealth could be lost in an instant. As much as she wanted to support him, she realized that this was a burden far greater than she could bear. She wasn't prepared for this kind of life. But Tawanda wasn't ready to give up. "We'll get through this together," he said, his voice filled with determination. I won't let anything tear us apart. Chipo wanted to believe him, but doubt lingered. Could they survive the storms ahead, or was this the beginning of the end? Days passed, and the tension in the mansion grew. Tawanda's family worked tirelessly to salvage their fortune, but the stress took its toll on everyone. One evening, Chipo received an unexpected letter from her mother, urging her to return home. The situation in the village had worsened, and her family needed her. Chipo stood by the window, the weight of the decision pressing on her. She couldn't ignore her family's needs, but leaving Tawanda now, when he was struggling the most, felt like an impossible choice. She had always dreamed of a life with him, but now the reality of their different worlds seemed insurmountable. Tawanda found her in the garden, a somber expression on his face. What's wrong? He asked, his voice tinged with concern. I have to go, Chipo said softly, her eyes welling up with tears. My family needs me. I don't know if I can stay here anymore. Tawanda's face fell. Chipo, don't leave. Please, we can work through this together. But as Chipo looked into his eyes, she knew that leaving was the only choice she could make. The future she had imagined with Tawanda no longer seemed possible. With a heavy heart, she turned and walked away, unsure of what the future would hold for them. Chipo returned to the village, but the weight of her decision lingered in her chest. She missed Tawanda, but deep down, she knew she had made the right choice. Her family needed her, and the life she had left behind was a part of her that she could never forget. Days turned into weeks, and Chipo focused on her work, helping her mother rebuild their farm. But as time passed, the memories of Tawanda and the mansion faded into the background. Yet every now and then, she would hear rumors of his family's troubles, whispers of a scandal that threatened to tear them apart. One evening, Chipo received a letter from Tawanda. His words were filled with sadness and longing. He spoke of the challenges his family was facing and how he had been unable to save them. His heart was broken, and he wondered if they would ever be able to rebuild their lives. Chipo's heart ached for him, but as much as she wanted to help, she knew there was nothing more she could do. The world they had once dreamed of seemed like a distant memory, a dream that had never been meant to come true. One evening, as Chipo sat by the fire, a figure appeared at the edge of the village. It was Tawanda. Her heart skipped a beat. What was he doing here? Was this a sign that their love was not truly over? But as Tawanda stepped closer, Chipo noticed something in his eyes, a look of uncertainty, of something he wasn't saying. Something had changed. And as he reached out to her, Chipo couldn't shake the feeling that this reunion would bring more than just answers. It would bring new questions, new choices, and a future that none of them had anticipated. Tawanda stood before Chipo, his face drawn and weary. His clothes were more ragged than the last time she had seen him, and there was a shadow in his eyes that hadn't been there before. He was no longer the confident young man from the mansion. He looked like someone who had been through a storm and emerged battered. Chipo, he said softly, his voice heavy with emotion. I came back because I need you. Everything, it's falling apart. Chipo's heart ached at the sight of him. The boy she had once dreamed of building a life with was now a shadow of the man he had been. What happened? She whispered, afraid of the answer. The family's gone bankrupt, he replied, his eyes dark with pain. The investments failed, and now they're all gone. My father, he's lost everything. I don't know how to fix it. Tawanda's words hit her like a punch to the gut. She had known things were bad, but she hadn't imagined it could come to this. She felt her chest tighten, the weight of his despair pressing down on her. But what are you going to do? She asked, her voice trembling. I need your help, Chipo, Tawanda said urgently, his voice heavy with desperation. There's a way out, but it requires someone who knows the land, someone who understands the heart of this country. I know you can help me. He stepped closer, his hand brushing against hers. I need you now more than ever. The night was thick with tension as Tawanda explained his plan. He had heard of a potential buyer for the family's land, a powerful businessman with ties to the government. But there was a catch. To secure the deal, Tawanda would need to prove his ability to manage the land himself without his family's influence. I can't do this alone, Tawanda admitted, his voice low. I've been away from this life for too long. But you know the land better than anyone. If we can work together, maybe we can save everything." Chipo felt a knot form in her stomach. Helping Tawanda meant becoming involved in a world she had tried to leave behind. The stakes were high, and the pressure felt unbearable. Still, her love for him was undeniable, and the idea of helping him gave her hope. Yet she couldn't ignore the nagging feeling that there was more to this than Tawanda was letting on. "I'll help you," she said finally, her voice steady despite the whirlwind of thoughts racing through her mind. "But we need to be careful. There's more at stake here than just land." Tawanda looked at her, his eyes filled with gratitude. "I know, but I believe in us." The next few days were a blur of activity as Chipo and Tawanda worked together to prepare the land for sale. Chipo guided Tawanda, teaching him how to navigate the land's complicated irrigation system, how to read the soil and the weather patterns. Slowly, they rebuilt a connection, as though the months of separation had never happened. But something was off. Chipo noticed that Tawanda had become increasingly distant. He would disappear for hours, meeting with shady characters who claimed to have influence in the government. Each time he returned, his face looked more anxious, more restless. One evening, after a long day of work, Chipo confronted him. "Tawanda, what aren't you telling me?" she asked, her voice sharp with suspicion. Tawanda hesitated, his eyes darting away. "I'm doing what I have to do, Chipo. We're so close, just a little longer, and everything will be all right." But Chipo could see the cracks in his facade. There was something he wasn't saying, and it scared her. The days grew darker as the pressure mounted. Tawanda became increasingly withdrawn, spending more time in meetings with men whose faces were unfamiliar to Chipo. The air between them crackled with tension, and she could feel the walls closing in. Then one night, everything changed. Tawanda returned late, his face pale and his hands shaking. He wouldn't look at her as he paced around the small hut. I made a deal," he muttered, his voice filled with dread. "A deal I didn't fully understand." Chipo's heart skipped a beat. "What kind of deal?" Tawanda looked at her, his eyes haunted. "A dangerous one. The buyer, he's not who he says he is. He's tied to corrupt government officials. I've gotten myself mixed up in something I can't get out of." Chipo's blood ran cold. "What do you mean? What did you do?" "I sold more than just the land," Tawanda said quietly. "I've signed away everything, the money, the land, and now I'm bound to them." Chipo recoiled in shock. "No, Tawanda, this wasn't the plan. We were supposed to save your family." "I thought it was the only way," Tawanda whispered. "But now, we're trapped." As the truth settled in, Chipo felt her world begin to crumble. The man she loved, the one she had trusted, had made a choice that threatened everything they had worked for. She could see now that Tawanda's desperation had led him down a dangerous path, one that she couldn't follow. The next morning, Chipo woke to find a letter on her doorstep. It was from Tawanda, and it was unlike any message she had ever received. "Chipo, I'm sorry. I thought I could fix everything, but I've only made it worse. The buyer is already here. It's too late to undo what I've done. I can't ask you to follow me down this road. Please stay safe. I'll be back when I can. I don't know when that will be." Tears welled in Chipo's eyes as she read his words. She felt abandoned, betrayed by the very person she had put all her trust in. The weight of the situation was suffocating. What was she supposed to do now? Chipo knew she couldn't wait around for Tawanda to return. The stakes had become too high. She had heard whispers around the village that government officials were already on their way to take control of the land, and she feared that soon the entire village would be caught in the crossfire. She decided to act. Alone, she ventured into the city to find out what had really happened. What she discovered there shook her to her core. Tawanda's deal was not just with a businessman, but with a powerful government official who had connections to illegal land deals. Tawanda had sold not just his family's land, but the future of many innocent families, including her own. Chipo's heart burned with fury. She had to stop this, but she had no idea how. The stakes had never been higher. In the city, Chipo found an unlikely ally, an old friend of her father's who had worked in the government. He was a man with connections, someone who understood the game of power. He promised to help her expose the corrupt deals, but only if she could help him gather more evidence. Desperate to save her family and the land, Chipo agreed. She was in too deep to turn back now. Together, they infiltrated meetings, gathered documents, and sent coded messages to reveal the corruption. But with every passing day, the danger grew. They were being watched, and it was only a matter of time before someone took notice. One evening, as Chipo was leaving a meeting with her ally, she realized she was being followed. She turned a corner and found herself face to face with two men, government agents. "Looking for something, Chipo?" one of them sneered. Chipo's heart raced as she stepped back. "I don't know what you're talking about." They didn't believe her. Before she could react, they grabbed her, dragging her into a dark alley. "Let me go," Chipo cried, struggling to free herself. The men only laughed. "You've been poking around where you don't belong, girl. You'll learn the price of curiosity." Just as the situation seemed hopeless, Chipo's ally appeared from the shadows. With quick thinking, he managed to subdue the agents, giving Chipo a chance to escape. Panting and terrified, she ran as fast as she could, her heart pounding. She had barely escaped with her life. When she returned to her hideout, a letter awaited her. It was from Tawanda. His handwriting was shaky, and the message was brief. "They're coming for me. The buyer, he's not just taking the land. He wants everything. Please, Chipo, I need you." Chipo felt the weight of his plea like a stone in her chest. She stood at a crossroads. Helping Tawanda might mean her own destruction, but abandoning him would haunt her forever. The government officials were closing in, and every decision felt like a step closer to the edge. She made up her mind. She would confront Tawanda one last time. If there was a way to stop the corruption, she would find it, even if it meant risking everything. Chipo met Tawanda in an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city. He was waiting for her, his face filled with regret. "I never meant for this to happen, Chipo," he said, his voice breaking. "I thought I was saving my family. But now, I've destroyed everything." Chipo's voice was steady, though her heart was heavy. "It's too late, Tawanda. You've made deals with monsters. They'll never stop coming for you." Tawanda's eyes burned with desperation. "I can make it right. Just help me one last time." With government agents closing in, Chipo and Tawanda devised a risky plan to escape the country. It was their only chance at survival. They gathered every piece of evidence they could find, ensuring they destroyed anything that could tie them back to the corruption. But just as they were about to leave, an ambush unfolded. Chipo and Tawanda ran, the sound of their footsteps pounding against the dirt as shadows closed in. The border was in sight, their escape route within reach. Then a gunshot shattered the air. Tawanda collapsed, blood staining the ground beneath him. "Go," he gasped, his voice ragged. "I love you, but you have to go." Tears streamed down Chipo's face as she hesitated, the weight of his words tearing at her. But she knew he was right. If she stayed, they would both be lost. Chipo turned and ran, the sound of her sobs mixing with the echo of gunfire behind her. As she crossed the border, she knew the world she had known was gone forever.